I've been dating my beautiful wife for 26 years and have been married for 22 years. And the other night I had this nightmare, right? And I wake up and I'm like getting out of the shower and I tell my wife, I'm like, I don't want you to run off with some young, ripped, hot thing. And she goes, oh gosh, what was this nightmare? I'm like, I don't want you to run off with some young, ripped, hot thing. And she goes, honey, I don't want some young, ripped, hot thing. I want you. And I was like, wait a minute. Now, that's not necessarily the best way you could have phrased that.
You're instantly reassured and not so reassured at the same time.
Of all the ways she could have said, now, it was just a nightmare, just relax. But to phrase it, I don't want some young, hot, ripped thing. I want you. Oh, I was suitably put into my place with that comment. I was delighted by that. Oh my God. And on that note, everybody, I'm going to say hello and welcome to Comic Lab, the show where you're going to get no hot ripped things involved. It's just Brad and I and making comics.
I want you to say hot ripped young things over and over and over because it comes out a little bit different each time.
I sound like I've been punch drunk or something. I'm like, hot ripped thing, hot ripped young thing.
Hot ripped hot.
I can't say it correctly anyway.
And making a living from comics. I'm Brad Geiger, the editor of webcomics.com and the cartoonist of Evil Inc.
And the cartoonist of Evil Inc. We haven't heard that one in a while.
The cartoonist.
Oh my goodness.
Right here.
And I'm his pal Dave Keller, the cartoonist of Drive and Sheldon and the co-director of the documentary Stripped.
And this week's hour of comics advice is made possible by your support at patreon.com/comiclab. So Dave, let's talk comics.
Let's talk comics, my friend. And big news, by the way, for those of you that might have missed it, we have 2 exclusive and really hilarious episodes of Drunk Comic Lab coming out into the world. And you're going to want to join us over at patreon.com/Comic Lab at the $5 level to get those 2. They're going to be Patreon exclusives.
Yeah.
Brad, what happened? How did these shows come into the world? You got to tell people.
Well, Dave and I decided we hadn't done something like this in a little while. So we decided to pour a couple of tasty adult beverages and record a show that was more freewheeling, more loosely based on storytelling, not so much on giving advice and so forth. And we had so much fun that the first hour just evaporated. And at that point, we were half in the can and we go, hey, do you want to keep going? And we agreed, yeah, let's keep going. So we ended that one and recorded another one, all of which to say we've got 2 1-hour episodes coming your way on the ProTips channel. In other words, if you're signed up for Comic Lab at the $5 level or higher, it's going to come to you just the same way ProTips comes to you. And on November 28th, you're going to get Drunk Comic Lab. And on December 5th, you're going to get Drunker Comic Lab.
And the reason why we called the second one Drunker Comic Lab is during the break, we made the classic mistake of saying, you know what, I'm going to refill my glass. And that second show, oh boy, it shows it. Don't waste any more time. Jump in on patreon.com/Comic Lab, COMICLAB Comic Lab, and you're going to get those shows over on the ProTips network there. And Brad, you have a topic you want to jump us into this week right away. And this is a really good one. It's about the shelf life of your comic.
Well, I was teaching my TV story analysis class at University of the Arts, and one of the things that I do every semester, and it's always so fun to do this. I show an episode of the Larry Sanders Show, which was an HBO show during the 90s. And it's always, I really kind of dig doing stuff like this because I know I'm showing them something that they haven't seen before. They're completely unfamiliar with it. And it's fun to get their reactions because it's a little different every time. And one of the things I really noticed this year, even more than last year, is I had to explain so much of the Larry Sanders Show to them because, and this was a show that ran in the 1990s on HBO. You don't need to know a whole lot more about it other than this. They made a lot of timely references. In other words, at one point, the studio executive mentions having a meeting with Fred Dryer. Now, Fred Dreyer did a TV series called Hunter, kind of a middle of the deck. He used to be a football player, became an actor.
Right.
The response was, oh, you must be so excited to have a meeting with Fred Dreyer, right? Well, of course, this goes over their heads. They reference Kenny Stabler, who was a football player. At one point, the joke was that he introduced Naomi Judd as the Judd. Now, if you
The Judd.
if you remember, the Judds, plural, was a country music act with Naomi Judd and her mother. The mother got, I think, hepatitis C and had to stop performing, at which Naomi Judd relaunched a solo career as Naomi Judd. The joke was he introduced her as the Judd. Well, unless you remember that little part of history that was at the time, you would have known it. It would have been a name you knew, but now not so much. I had to go back and explain. When they talked about the Judd, here's what they're talking about, and so part of the reason I want to show this and this kind of stuff to them is because they're all young, budding screenwriters, and I said, you have to make this decision for yourself in your writing, because if you put timely references into your writing, the plus side is you can make a really quick connection, a zing bang connection, because it's something that's happening in that person's life. It's part of the zeitgeist. It's very effective. And by the way, in a way, it's kind of lazy writing, because you remember the show Murphy Brown, right? She was a TV news reporter. And they got a lot of punchlines out of just name dropping. She'd come in and they'd say, "Oh, why are you late?" And, "Well, Sam Donaldson parked in my parking place and I had to slash his tires." Well, the thought of slashing Sam Donaldson, who's this staid news broadcaster, slashing Sam Donaldson's tires was good for a punchline, right? It's also kind of lazy. Because, there's not much there. But they got tons of punchlines out of name dropping and references. And I said to my students, you've got to make the same decision. Do you want to do zeitgeist writing that makes reference that are timely? The good news is it's very effective in the moment. It's very effective. The bad news is 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road, it gets less and less powerful. Your ability to connect with an audience becomes less powerful. On the other hand, you've got other shows that are evergreen. They talk about stuff that is eternal. Family shows, stuff like this. You can watch them over and over and over again. I'll give you a good example. Gilligan's Island was not high art by any means, but it was a concept with a small group of archetypical characters that you could still watch today and have the same amount of enjoyment. You don't need anything explained to you watching Gilligan's Island. Whereas Larry Sanders Show, you got to have a loudmouth like me sitting next to you telling you who Kenny Stabler was. My question to you, Dave, is, which do you think is the better decision? Leaning into the zeitgeist and writing references that are from today, or leaning away from that and trying to make your writing as evergreen as possible?
Well, first of all, I want to compliment you on your enunciation of archetypical, which, man, few people land that plane. So congratulations on that.
I was actually nervous as I was doing it. I'm like, okay, all right, slow down. You can do this.
It's like the little hamster has to slow on the wheel. Like, get ready. We're going to say it. Archetypical. We did it. There's a small celebration. No, so that's true. And then I also want to say that in comics, I think one of the most two of the most useful comparisons would be, if you really want to go back in the day, maybe a Pogo in the 50s and 60s, which had a lot of references to politics and pop culture of the day, a lot of which is inscrutable unless you live through it, right?
Yeah.
And then more recently, for people of Brad and my generation, Bloom County, which was amazingly venomous and cutting writing, and also sweet, but mostly venomous and cutting writing. A lot of pop culture, a lot of politics references.
Yeah.
that were incredibly impactful at the time. It won the Pulitzer Prize, for God's sakes, as a comic strip, which was super rare. In fact, I think might be only one or two cartoonists that ever did that as a comic strip.
The only other one I can think of is Gary Trudeau for Bloom County. Or for Doonesbury.
Right.
I think
so
he's
anyway,
a Pulitzer winner.
Incredibly hard to pull off. So clearly it was impactful. And the fact that Brad and I are still talking about it 40 years later, it was impactful.
Mm-hmm.
However, even someone who lived through it now, i.e. me or Brad, if we go back and read through Bloom County now, it's not an impactful read. It's a nostalgia read because a lot of it doesn't hold up. Like, I have to honestly pause and think, who was Caspar Weinberger again? Okay, he was Secretary of Defense under Reagan, and I think he was in the Iran-Contra scandal. Like, I have to think about it.
Yeah.
But at the time, I remember thinking it was so funny that Opus was making a Caspar Weinberger joke. I remember the feeling of reading it, right?
I remember the comic. I remember the exact one you're talking about.
Yeah. And so you contrast that with a contemporary comic, Bill Watterson's Calvin and Hobbes, right?
Yeah.
And almost religiously, Bill avoided pop culture references or even physical items that would date a comic. And for that reason alone, I think Calvin and Hobbes will be read 100 years from now. Bloom County will be largely read by historians of an era, and only as one example in chapter 42 of a history textbook, you know?
Yep.
So what can we draw from that? Well, like, even with Watterson, when he makes a reference to like TV being a vacuous wasteland, right? And the TV sort of bouncing in the background with a lot of little comic-con around it.
Yeah.
The TV itself is drawn like a 90s era vacuum tube television, right? It's not a flat screen. So you can date it, but you still get the joke 40 years on. You still get what he's going for, you know? And so it's still going to work. And so to Brad's question of whether I think it's better to go for the pop culture reference or go for the long term, I think, listen, if I was the best version of myself that I could be, I would be constantly writing for the long form.
Yeah.
But on an average day, I just want to get a joke out. And often it's just about a pop culture thing that I want to joke about. Like I've done ones before about Marvel, or I did one this week about Funko Pop, which is a little shitty toy that people collect. Yeah. And those are throwaway jokes. Even me, 50 years from now, you're going to have to remind me. I mean, if I'm here 50 years from now, you're going to have to remind me what the heck I was joking about, you know?
Right.
They are not evergreen. They are definitely have an expiration date. And I'll tell you, though, having pop culture jokes gives me a career. They gave Burke Breathitt a career. They bought him an $8 million house in Malibu. They did just fine by Burke Breathitt, you know? So it works. It's just a question of what you want. So I turn the question back to you, Brad. What do you think is the better route to go?
Oh, I think the better route to go is whichever one gives you the strongest work in the moment, right? And it goes back to that whole thing we talked about an episode or two back. We had the person that had written in saying, basically, who's going to publish my books after I'm gone, after I've passed on, right? And this is another question that goes to our comics immortality, right? Are people still going to be reading Evil Inc. after I'm gone, after I'm not here to go out on social media and tell you to read them? Are they going to actually read them? And I guess I'm not that concerned with immortality, although I've just noticed even in my own writing, when I go back to put the files for a book together. Like, in fact, I did it not in the book I'm putting together that it will be the next one coming out. I make a Zack Snyder reference to something. I forget what it even came into, but it was a Zack Snyder reference, and I actually changed it.
Yeah,
I did. I tell you what, for this particular one, I made two versions of the last panel. One of them was Zack Snyder, because at the time the Snyder Cut for Justice League had come out, and it was very, very topical, and I knew I could get a solid laugh out of it. I did, by just making a few changes, I did a second version of that same panel and did a Godzilla joke, because Godzilla was more, you know, it's been around since 1950. It's more, it's got more shelf life. Mm-hmm. And so on the website, the Snyder Cut was the joke. But for the book, it'll be the Godzilla joke because I know that Snyder Cut joke ain't gonna cut it.
Right.
Right. I actually did. I don't do it often. In fact, I think it's the only time I've done it in recent memory. But I actually made 2 versions because I know for the book that wasn't going to be a good solid punchline. And I know from reading my own stuff that's when I'm going to make a dated reference. And I also know that sometimes those dated references just plain old get you into trouble. So I try to lean away from it a little bit and go a little bit more evergreen, to be careful about the references that I make, because I know even in the middle of the time of when that comic hits the web and when I'm going to print it, maybe a year or 2 or longer later, that stuff is going to get stale fast. So I actually try to lean away from it a little bit.
Well, so I want to argue on behalf of my 2 friends, past Brad and present Brad, and I'll tell you why. I fully condone you, George Lucasing the current one for the book. I think that's a smart idea, and I have zero problems with you changing your own work for that purpose. I don't know why people get uppity about that. And then I also want to argue on behalf of my friend past Brad, because that Zack Snyder joke worked. It landed. It got people to come back the next day. It gave you patrons. It continued to pay the mortgage. It worked. It did the job. So both of those reactions are natural. They're valid as an artist, and there's nothing to be ashamed of in having a contemporary joke and then also changing it later on if you need it. That's fine. So I also want to say, because this is very relevant to the conversation, my wonderful assistant, Beth, is back from maternity leave. Woohoo! And she and I are putting together, we've started work on Drive Act 4 book, but also on the next Sheldon book. Yeah. And the next Sheldon book is going to be sort of a Dave's favorites or Dave's faves of the last 5 to 7 years, right? All color, going to be a nice 250-page book or so. And what I'm finding, though, is that it's really interesting. The ones that I easily go toss, don't include it, are the super contemporary ones that dated very badly.
Yeah.
There's no need to include them. Like, I get it that it might have been somebody's favorite, but no one needs to hear my hot take on I don't know, 30 Rock on the last season or something. That doesn't need to be preserved for history. But I will say, though, that it is. I'm happy that I have ones that have stood the test of time that I can include in the book. So I find that a nice mix with Sheldon of character-based, timeless jokes and pop culture references seem to be my happy place. But that doesn't have to be everyone's happy place.
I think you made a lot of sense with that, but I wasn't able to hear that well because the whole time I'm excited. Is this as close to a 25th anniversary book that we're going to get? I mean, what you're talking about smells and tastes an awful lot like a 25th anniversry book.
Well, that's fun that you should say that.
And did you say 250 pages? 25?
God damn you!
We're getting an anniversary book.
We're not getting it. No, this
is an anniversary book.
You mother of pearl. Anyway, so it's going to be. You know what? It is kind of coming out in the 25th anniversary of Sheldon. You're not wrong.
Yes.
And it is going to have around 2. Yeah. All right. Well.
Why? Now, wait a minute. I don't know why.
Listen, I'm not going to say that I'm not going to market it for the 25th year. It will have that in the Kickstarter marketing. Absolutely.
Yeah, good.
But I want to say, because this was a topic earlier in the show, I'm not skipping topics, but we had talked a long time about, like, should Dave leave Sheldon behind? Yeah. Drive is so much more successful financially, and the audience is so much more in Dave's energies for it. But I will tell you that I'm glad I held on the decision, because I chose Stasis for a while because it's been decades, you know what I mean? And I didn't want to accidentally leave something by the wayside that I still treasured and then regretted it. Yeah. And I have kind of come around on Sheldon in that it's sort of it is what it is. I give it less shrift than I give to Drive, but I enjoy it when I do it. I still enjoy the ink and paper process. I still enjoy the ability to comment on pop culture on one-offs. I still enjoy being able to do one-panel strips if I want to, or random character-based jokes if I want to. Like, it's still a great outlet for me in a way that Drive will never be. And yet I totally love Drive. Drive is my baby. I have so much fun with it. So that's sort of a side path conversationally. But I also want to say, though, that in putting together this Sheldon book, this is sort of an interesting thing to note. I was always curious why in the Roaring '20s there were zero cultural references to the Spanish flu. Nobody made a damn reference to the Spanish flu. Like millions of people had died, and nobody made a goddamn reference in any book, in any play, in any jazz music. Nobody was talking about the Spanish flu, right? Yeah. And I was like, God, they just wanted to wipe it clean from their memory. And I'll tell you, as I was putting together the Sheldon book, there's like 2 years of Sheldon comics that make pretty spot on or oblique references to the fact that we were in a pandemic. Yeah. And I don't want to include any of those in my Sheldon book. I'm like, nah, just leave those out. I don't want them. Yeah. I don't want to, history doesn't need to record those. So I'm doing the same thing that they did in the Roaring '20s. I'm just erasing the pandemic from my own history.
I agree with the decision 100%. You know, because at this point, like when you said COVID comics, I'm like, my first reaction internally was, oh God, I hope he's going to tell me he got rid of them, because who wants to read that stuff? Yeah, you know, I totally get it. It's, even if it's a funny joke, it's a depressing topic. But the fact that we went through all that. You know, it is fascinating. Yeah.
Like, I think one of my best comics that I ever made from a writing standpoint was this comic that I did. It was called something like 28 Stages of Grief. And it was this really long, like 40 panels Sheldon that I did.
Yeah.
I was going to include that one because stylistically and writing wise, it was very good. But even now, as we're talking, I'm like, I should yank that one. It's not, no one needs it. You know what I mean? Like, no one, you don't go to Sheldon for like, hey, I wonder how I should feel about the COVID pandemic. No one's going to that. So anyway, all that being said is, I do a mix of both. I write for the moment, and I also write for a little bit for the longevity, and they're both fine. They both have built me a career, and that's what I'm happy about. That's what I wanted when I did this, you know?
Well, I guess that's also a good thing to tie into that earlier topic about, you know, who's going to publish my books when I'm gone. A lot of what we centered on was, I don't care. I'm going to be dead. You know,
right.
What do I care if you're reading Evil Inc. after I'm dead? I'm going to be dead. I'm going to have much bigger problems on my hands than whether you're reading Evil Inc. Right?
Yeah.
And part of it is why I'm not super worried about that. It is because after I'm gone, and if I made a reference that you didn't quite get because it's historical. Nah, that's okay. That's also what it was. It was what it was. And, if it makes it harder to read 10 years down the road, I'm also kind of okay with that, you know?
Yeah. Like, I'm not a penny arcade reader, but I bet if you tried to read the first 10 years of that, for me, it would be inscrutable. Like, I wouldn't know what the jokes were referencing about a specific level on a specific video game. I mean, how more of the moment could you get than some of those strips, you know?
Yeah.
So it is what it is. And yet their success in the time and now is 40 times what mine is. So it's still an incredibly viable path for making comics. But I thank you for bringing this up, because it was a really interesting topic to chat over, whether you write for the moment or whether you write for the history books. And let us jump into, before we take a break, let's jump into one more topic that might be a quick one. It's about YouTube, coming in from Tyler over at patreon.com/Comic Lab, which I know a lot of people have already jumped over to join us for the Drunk Comic Lab and the Drunker Comic Lab, which I almost couldn't pronounce there. Anyway, so Tyler writes, "Hi, Comic Prefects. Now that YouTube has a tiered membership feature, do you have any thoughts about using this instead of Patreon? Specifically for those of us that early in our career and haven't started a Patreon yet, I wonder if it could be advantageous and more seamless to use YouTube to build an audience and have backers in one place. Thanks, Tyler." So Brad, youtube.com and a few other sources, by the way, have also done this, have mirrored the Patreon structure of continuous small monthly payments for artists. What are your thoughts about a cartoonist going to youtube.com rather than patreon.com?
This is one of those things that when we talk about recurring topics on this show, this is another recurring topic. And it is, if you don't learn history, you're kind of forced to repeat it, you know?
Yeah.
And this is another one of those internet history things that you need to understand to make a decision like this. Should I go with YouTube or should I go with Patreon? the first thing that I would hope that you would do is learn your history. And history is this. YouTube has a long history of doing exactly this, offering creators this great deal, and then once they've jumped on, making that great deal a horrible deal and clawing it back. Offering them great ad rates, and then once they've jumped on and built all their audience,
Yes.
all of a sudden those ad rates plummet. Right. And not only have they done it once or twice, YouTube has done this for a long time. This has become a recognizable pattern of behavior for YouTube and changing how their content gets served, changing the kind of content that gets promoted. YouTube has been effing with creators for a long time. And the only reason that they've done it is because they got way out in front of streaming video before anybody else did and became the 800-pound gorilla. And they can do whatever they want because nobody's going to touch them. You know,
Right.
their closest, for a long time, their closest competitor was Vimeo. Today, you can argue that their closest competitor is TikTok, but they're going to do whatever they want. Now, juxtapose that with the history of Patreon, which has a long history of doing what we need Patreon to do, and that is process subscription payments. They've done it for years. They've done it incredibly well. They've hit some snags like anybody else, but then they got on top of it, fixed it, and went on. They have not, that I'm aware of, any history of offering something good and then making it worse. In fact, when they started this whole idea of having different systems that people bought into, they made sure to have that existing thing that we all signed up for. We didn't lose that. We got called. They had a word for it. It was the people that had been initially part of Patreon.
Yeah, it was like, let's just call it like the launch tier or whatever it was. It wasn't, but
right.
Yeah.
That's what we were, right? And now we've talked about they're going to try to entice us to get off of that and by giving us new benefits. But it's not by taking things away, mind you, but by giving us new things that we want. And then we're going to eventually get walked up the ladder. Big difference there. There hasn't been a lot of clawback from Patreon. They've done an amazing job of doing exactly what we need them to do. We can complain whether we don't think that the new Patreon design, whether that new app is good or bad. We can disagree on that. We can disagree on a lot of stuff. But when it comes to building a subscription base and processing those payments, which is a lot more complicated than we give it credit for, when it comes to that, they do it beautifully. They do the one thing that I need them to do, and they do it really well. To give up that in exchange for YouTube that has a proven track record of effing creators time and time again is a really, really bad idea.
Yeah. And I will say this, for a couple of years there, Patreon would hold events where they would do live sort of in-person instruction, and they'd have talks from really successful Patreon artists from different mediums. And I, who am not a vlogger nor really watch a lot of YouTube, I would sort of casually be interested to see the really successful people on YouTube would get on stage and they'd do like a 10-minute talk. And Brad, to a T, they would all say, here are the 40 ways that YouTube has slowly screwed my business over the years. To a T. Yep. And this is just me as a casual observer. I don't use YouTube that much. I watch it. Anytime I need to fix my washing machine, I bring up YouTube, but I don't really spend a lot of time on YouTube. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like the 20-year-old and younger set spend a lot of time on YouTube, but not me. Anyway, all this being said, Google as a company, Google being the parent company, Alphabet being the parent company of YouTube, as a company, unless it's serving ads, they are so freaking changeable and with their promises and what they give us in terms of apps, in terms of services, in terms of terms, in terms of conditions. They will pull the rug out from under you as sure as it's Tuesday. Like they have no qualms about being like, Google Plus, okay, now it's gone. Google Reader, okay, now it's gone. YouTube, this publishing frequency, okay, now that's gone. And you're like, what the hell? You cannot rely on Alphabet as a company for your artistic career. And I would extend that to Meta has some services that they're offering to roll out for artists that are a Patreon fashion. I wouldn't rely on Meta as much as I would rely on my worst enemy. They're going to pull that rug out from you eventually as sure as the sun shines. It is not a good idea to go with them. So like Brad, do I have qualms about this or that with Patreon? Sure, I do. I could talk for an hour about this new free members tier that I hate. But has Patreon have a track record of, I don't know, 6, 7, 8 years with me, 9 years maybe? I don't know how long we've been on there, of consistently processing payments and sending me those payments and helping me grow my monthly subscriber base month in, month out. Yes, they've been great. At that core function, all I want them to do is process those payments, and they do it.
Yep. And that's all you can ask them to do. So when it comes down to a question like this, the first thing I want to encourage you to do is look at the history. There's so many times this has come up just this past year where I've been saying, 100+ years of comics history tells you a lot about whether you should sign that contract with Marvel Comics. History. I'm telling you, and it's all out there. It's all easy to find. It's all easy to see. Learn your history. Learn what happened in the past if you want to make good decisions about your future.
Hey, if you're listening while you work, take a minute to stand and stretch.
And while you're doing that, we're going to tell you why you should join us on Patreon.
When you do, you're going to get hours and hours of podcasts that we've recorded just for backers.
And exclusive Patreon posts that go even deeper on Comic Lab topics.
And access to our exclusive Discord server, which is a thriving community of professional cartoonists.
So you can support the show you love and get tons of actionable resources for your own cartooning.
And listen, if you can't swing a pledge this month, we get it. No worries.
Yeah, listen, you can still support the show by rating us wherever you get your podcasts.
Just leave a 5-star review and a few kind words.
That, along with mentions on social media, is incredibly helpful.
Now, everybody, let's talk comics.
Well, Brad, listeners of the show will remember that a few weeks back after the National Cartoonist Society Reuben Weekend, we came with a fire under us, ready to start in on Amazon Kindle Direct Publishing, specifically for their unlimited service, where kind of like Netflix, people could pay a one-time monthly fee and get unlimited amount of digital books to read. And as our friends over at Andrews McMeel were telling us that even though the individual page rates were horrible, that you would be surprised by once somebody gets hooked into your ecosystem, i.e. your books under a shared author page, how many of your pages they will fly through. And that in aggregate can be hundreds of dollars, if not thousands of dollars a month, right? So Brad and I were excited to try it as a very passive income source. And Beth and I, and mainly Beth, my assistant, did a wonderful job of prepping the books for Amazon. Has some specific quirks on their marketing book covers versus their actual book covers. So she basically mocked up a secondary marketing book cover using the existing assets. It's not a huge amount of work, but not nothing. Like, she spent some time on it. And anyway, we got them all launched. We were launching them through the system. Everything was going well. All of a sudden, I get this email. And Brad alerted me to the fact that this was the case, and I now think that this is the case, that these were emails not from humans, even though that it had a human name appended at the end, like sincerely Greg or whatever it was. Greg was not Greg. Greg was an AI, or Greg was an algorithm that was screening some process of mine.
Yeah.
And long story short, without really any warning or with any way to contact any human or talk to a human about it, they completely shut down my entire Amazon Kindle publishing account. I had uploaded 3 books, 2 of which were approved. The third one hit some weird snag that I have no idea what. They thought that my Anatomy of Authors book, that I was claiming that it included the works of Shakespeare and Arthur Conan Doyle and this and that. I said it skewers Shakespeare and Arthur Conan Doyle. That's a very different language. You know what I mean?
Yeah. They thought there was a copyright problem there?
They thought that I was claiming, and so they shut my entire account down for fraud without giving me any chance to say anything about it. I have since learned, since I researched this, that apparently, especially since AI has gotten started with ChatGPT, that Kindle Publishing Unlimited has been flooded with AI submissions of people just looking for pennies here, penny. They're literally flood an account with 100 books that were just fake, made up books. Yeah. And then Kindle has basically set, it's like a war of AI. They've put AI up against it, searching for fraud. And I got caught up in all that, shut down. I sent emails to all sorts of people saying, hey, just review this account. Here's my official Amazon author page. You can see I'm a real human being. I'm an independent cartoonist. Here's the physical book being sold on Amazon, of which I'm now trying to put the ebook up for. What the hell? Help me out here. Nothing, Brad. Radio silence. They said they'd get back to me in 5 days. It's been like 10. I haven't heard anything.
Wow.
So I think this is a major problem for Amazon that they're trying to figure out how to do. And B, I just want to tell everybody, I would not recommend going with KDP right now. This has proved to be a real disappointment in terms of how this functions on a basic level. Like, I don't know if Andrews McMeel in good faith knows about this because they are probably handled by a human editor. They don't go into the slush pile, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to put that word out there that we put in probably 20 to 40 hours of work on getting these 3 books up into Amazon Kindle Publishing with zero to show for it. And now a semi-permanently, hopefully, shut down account. And so what's your reaction, Ben, to Kindle Publishing, Brad?
Well, I put 6 or 7 books up on KDP, and they were like chapters of Evil Inc. So they'd be 22 pages apiece, and I had a heck of a time trying to get them loaded and everything. Finally, used the Kindle Create software to do a guided view of my comic.
As did we, yeah.
Which actually was I told you I used that back in 2017 and was disgusted with it. They made clearly some improvements to it since the last time I did it. So it was much easier to use, and uploaded them. And I got a message from KDP that said that there was a problem. There was a guided view error. I was using the incorrect masking error. My book's masking color used in guided view should be updated to better match the selections I made. You can see this at, and then it goes through location 4, 5, 6. The current default masking can be disorienting and impair the reading experience. I have no idea what that means. I've looked at the locations that they're talking about in preview. I don't see any problems. I've done and made just I've gone through on all of them and just made arbitrary masking changes and got the same message back that I was using the incorrect masking color. I've gone through Kindle Create and used no masking color at all. And the thing about it is I'm not, it's hard to tell whether I'm still seeing the same error that I saw last week or whether this is throwing a new error. In other words, trying to communicate, and this has always been my problem with Amazon, even going back to AWS, that one weekend I tried to make that work and almost jumped out a window. Trying to communicate with Amazon is always so difficult. So I don't know. Right now, my stuff is up on KDP. My stuff can be read through Kindle Unlimited. I don't know whether my problem is that I'm worried that, same as you, if I don't somehow correct this, they're just going to shut me down entirely. Yeah. So right now I'm going through very tentatively. I will say they are up. I will also say the response has been meager. It hasn't been great, although I haven't gone out. I wanted to experiment. So I wanted to see whether this was actually like being put out to a huge, gigantic audience. Or whether I was supposed to bring my audience to it. Right. So far, it seems a lot like the latter. I did send Patreon people out there. I found the answer to one question we had. Remember, we put categories on all of our books. Right. And then when we published them, there were no categories. Do you remember that?
Right. Yes.
There were no and it was like, I put categories. There's no categories. Well, I did some deep diving into Kindle Creator community forums and so forth. And I found something. I don't know about the veracity, but it does hold water with my experience. Those categories will not show up until you've cracked the top 100 in any given category.
Oh.
Once you've done that, then the categories show up.
That makes sense. And I bet it's not even cracking 100. It's probably until you can be ranked in any way, shape, or form. Like you're number 4,038 in home/gardening/tomato care, you know?
Right.
So I will also say this. One of the reasons why my anatomy books, one of the reasons why my account, I think, got shut down was I very intentionally mixed child safe, but also all ages humor categories.
Yeah.
And somehow that triggered something with Amazon that I was like, whoa, okay. Where they do not want child safe to also be all ages. I'm like, it can be the same thing. You can have family friendly, but also all ages. Why is that necessarily in opposition? Anyway, long story short, here's the two takeaways from this update that I think Brad and I want you to take away is. One, do not yet dive into this until we get some clarity with a few more months on how this is going to net out, right? Because I'm shut down and Brad's in a holding pattern. So far, this is not working out great for either one of us. No. Corporate advice
we cannot endorse it.
Yeah,
we
can't endorse
this
exactly.
at all.
And the second takeaway that I think both Brad and I would get behind on this is, once again, look at the companies that have a history and a track record of screwing people over. And Amazon is one of them, right?
Yeah.
And so even though this was going to be a side hustle, one more leg that Brad and I were trying to put under our table, I think we're both willing to be able to walk away from this if need be, because Amazon has a proven track record of not being a people-centric company. We are just another number, another cog in their wheel to generate profit from. And so if we get cut, if our books don't make it on the platform, if we have success, Amazon doesn't really matter. We're such a blip in the overall numbers of their system that, and, you know, in the same way that they treat the people in their warehouse like you and I treat disposable tape dispensers, just something to be burned through and used up. If they burn through and use up a Sheldon account or an Evil Inc. account, we're just one more cog in that wheel for Amazon. So that's our takeaway advice right now, is maybe this is not for you, and maybe Amazon's history should have been the forewarning for us here.
Yeah. And I mean, you're absolutely right. We gave it a shot. I'll be honest with you. If I wasn't doing the podcast, I don't think I would have spent the time just from having done it, like I said, way back in like 2016 and 2017. If I wasn't doing the podcast, I wouldn't have spent the time on it. But I'll tell you this, all the while that I've been spinning my wheels on Amazon trying to make this work, I've been selling ebooks and e-comics like crazy on drivethroughcomics.com. I sell amazingly on that. And by the way, I can endorse them. They're not sponsoring the show, but it's drive-through, THRU, comics.com. And I've been selling solidly for a long time there. They're a solid leg underneath my table.
Well, and I will say this, Amazon has this no competitive clause with their ebooks, where you're supposed to take your ebooks down from other stores if you're going to offer them up on Amazon. So in anticipation of trying this for 6 months, which is what I was going to do, I took all my ebooks down from my Shopify store, right?
Yeah.
And literally, Brad, within 12 hours of taking down my Shopify store ebooks, I had a reader in Australia be like, "Oh, that's a real shame that you don't offer ebooks of Drive. There's no way I can afford to ship the 3-pound Drive books, 9 pounds total to Australia. I was going to get the ebooks." And I was like, God damn it. Why did I'm going back to my Shopify store offering my ebooks, this Amazon thing. So anyway, long story short, corporate America, no bueno. Let's go on to the next topic.
Well, the next topic, Dave, you'll be happy to know, comes in to us from a faithful Patreon backer, and it goes like this. How do I utilize Patreon as an archive of my webcomic? I've looked at other Patreon pages, and they don't seem to be ideal for someone to go through a backlog of my comics and catch up. How can I make my Patreon page more accessible to new members? Dave, let's give this person a little bit of advice. They're trying to use Patreon as an archive and having a little bit of a tough time of it.
Okay, so this is going to be a little bit of a tough love answer. The true answer is, this is not what Patreon is good at. It's not what Patreon does. You got to have a website. It doesn't need to be fancy. It doesn't need to be pretty. You need a website, and a website that can do archives, which is probably like a comics form of WordPress, is going to be your easiest bet. Patreon is not and has never been a good system for archiving. It is great for processing payments and setting those payments to you and giving some behind the veil exclusives and some sneak peeks and some early reads. You're great at that. Not good at archiving, especially not good at visual archiving. I would not recommend it. You got to have your own website. Brad, what's your thought on this one?
I agree with you. 100%. I will expand on that a little bit. Okay. And that is this. I could see if you wanted to monetize your archives, which is a slightly different conversation, then you definitely need to make Patreon work for this. If your archives is part of your monetization plan, which I think you've got to be pretty far along to do this. Like I wouldn't be doing it unless I had years and years and years of comics to do, right? I didn't suggest Dave do it until he was way far along into Drive. I think you need a very deep archive, because part of what's going to help make that person a Patreon backer in the first place is reading through your archives and becoming a big fan. Right. And to a certain extent, you have to have enough free stuff out there to make that happen. But let's say this person is in the place where they've got, a decade or so under their belt and they want to monetize their archive. Then in that case, I'll tell you a couple of things that I want to suggest. The first one is to piggyback on Dave's idea. Yes, you absolutely do need a website, and you can use the Patreon plugin to make some of the areas of that website Patreon exclusive. Right. They have to sign in with their Patreon login to get that stuff. Yes. Then you can organize your archives exactly however you want, because you're doing it on your WordPress website. You're using any number of the tools that you can use to organize and catalog your material, and it's also Patreon exclusive. So you've got that. Number two, this is another really good use of that new collections feature that Patreon trotted out with their new update that I'm much more excited about than my friend over here is. Dave is not as excited about collections. I'm using them so much, Dave, that my problem now is I need collections for my collections. All right, slow it down there. Stop and think about it.
I'm so handsome. I need extra mirrors for my mirrors.
No, it's not about. I don't even know. Again, because Patreon doesn't offer good analytics, I don't know whether anybody's actually using this stuff.
Oh,
but
okay.
Like so every Evil Link After Dark is a collection.
Sure.
But I've also got collections of just let's say Halloween themed comics, right? Well, I'd like to keep all my Evil Link After Dark collections into one box, and all of my commissions, for example, in another. I want collections for my collections. I want a way to catalog those collections.
Now I understand. And you know what? In fairness, I should have led with this. To do that, Brad, on Patreon, you know what you need is your own goddamn website, Brad. That's what you need. Put it on your website. Patreon doesn't do that. It doesn't do it well.
I have that too. I've got an Evil Link After Dark section.
You acknowledge the wound. You're like, okay, slow it down.
I have that too. But I also know that I've got a lot of different users with a lot of different ways that they're accessing this stuff. And I want to make sure that I've got either way they're going, I want them covered. If they're desktop users, I want them covered. If they're more comfortable on the website, I want them covered. If they're more comfortable on the Patreon app, I want them covered. I want all those bases covered.
Yeah, I guess I will say this with love and admiration, actually. Back when we used to offer screensavers as this big thing for readers to have, there was no one in the world who jumped through more hoops to create more versions of screensavers. Like, do you have an Android One phone? Do you have a phone that was only produced in Taiwan between 1997 and 1998 and only 600 were sold? Brad is making you a specific screensaver for you, like a wallpaper for you. Like you jumped through so many hoops, and God bless you for it, for your readers to produce all these variants. And I a little bit hear an echo of that here, where like, if people are on a desktop reading on Patreon, I want. If they're on their phone and on my website, I want them doing that. And like, you can just say, this is the format it comes in. It's on my website. Go there from Patreon. That would be acceptable, Brad.
No, you're right. A little bit of that is imposter complex. Right? It's like my work's not good enough to get you to just do what you need to do. I've got to make it so that there's all these different ways. A little bit of that is imposter complex, and I'll cop to that. I'll absolutely cop to that. In fact,
but again, I'm not saying this as an insult. I was saying it with love, because you're also a good man, and you want all your readers to have the easiest way to find your comics, which is admirable. It really is. But it just produces a lot of work for you, is what my worry was.
Well, to make matters worse, there's another thing I do every month.
Oh, God.
And that is I do Dropbox links to my Patreon backers at the beginning of every month after their payments have processed for the month. And one of those is a folder full of Evil Inc. full-page comics.
Yeah, you
right?
do that.
And as I've explained in the past on ProTips and other places, those links expire at the end of the month. So you've got to keep being a Patreon backer if you want to keep accessing that, or else the link just doesn't work after 30 days. And you can go in and I have it set up so you can't necessarily download them. It's read only. And you go through and you can read them on the Dropbox interface if you'd like.
Now, have you ever looked at the metrics of that? Does anybody do it?
No. But so here's the deal.
Because I'm saying this with love. I didn't mean this to be an intervention, so I'm going to stop talking. But with love, a part of this is what it sounds like. Like, Dave, you don't realize this, but Wells Fargo still offers a Pony Express service. And I hand print out every comic that I made during the month, and I use the Pony Express service to send it out by horse to every reader. And you're like, Brad, you don't have to do that. I mean, do you have any metrics to show this works or is used, or?
No metrics. I do know it's worked. I do know that it's being used, because when I screw up, I find out about it through people very quickly.
Well, that's a form of metric, yeah.
Yeah. But I will tell you this. There's two, and by the way, I still do all those desktop wallpapers and the mobile backgrounds, and I've got about 30 different versions of them.
You still do it?
I've got it down to a science. I can have it done in about 20 minutes. And by the way, generative fill has become very useful in that regard too. I will say that. But here's the deal. Especially with those Dropbox links, right? I put that, I use that as a marketing tool, especially near the end of the month when that end of the month churn is coming up. I say, hey, this is a great time to join our Patreon, because in just a couple of days, I'm going to be sending out those Dropbox links where you're going to get complete access to all of my archives. It's a big value add to the becoming a member and initiating that subscription. And it takes me like 15 minutes to redo all those Dropbox links, if that, and then to send them out. I mean, it's a very low-hanging fruit that I get a lot of marketing over, and I get a lot of churn in the positive sense. I get more people coming in at the beginning of the month because they're getting this big, it's 4 gigabytes worth of stuff if you added it all up. And I get to say, you're going to get 4 gigabytes of my best stuff just for signing up.
Well, and it works. You have an amazingly successful Kickstarter and a rabid fan base, and I can't poo-poo that at all. I just, for years, you were telling me, like, look, you got to create a mobile version of your website and you got to incorporate Patreon. And I finally did it. And I was like, thanks for Brad's advice. And I a little bit feel like I say this with love and as a friend and an admiration. I feel like there's a lot of extra work you give yourself in this regard.
Yeah. It may be, and it's one of those things that I'm scared. I've been doing it for so long, I'm scared to stop doing it.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
Because looking back onto this past year, I had a real big, significant dip in my Patreon, and it wasn't for any other reason that I made a small change in how I had been doing things forever. And I didn't realize that the effect that had on my business until almost 6 months later, when it was like in the danger zone. And it wasn't that I made a bad change. It wasn't that I made a dumb change, but I had made one small change in how I did things. And it had a ripple effect on how I was doing all of my outreach.
Right.
It hurt me. I've been clawing back ever since this summer, slowly making incremental changes or incremental improvements.
Yeah.
And so once burned, twice shy, I'm a lot less apt to make even small changes for things that I've been doing for a long time.
Right.
Because man, oh man, I shot myself in the foot with that.
Well, first of all, that's a very valid emotional and business response to having made a change that a little bit caught you off flat-footed. But I also want to say, I might be wrong about this, by the way, because there are many paths to the mountain in terms of how you build and maintain a Patreon account. And Brad might be right. His readership might love all these extras and these little bonuses, even if they're not individually taking advantage of this month's. The fact that it's there and they know it's there might keep them around. So who am I to say anything about that? I will say, Brad, you had mentioned using AI generative fill. And since we kind of wrapped up that topic, I wanted to say, one other thing about AI generative fill, which is, if you remember, you were kind of poo-pooing it when it first started coming out. And I was like, I could see ways that we could use it, right?
Yeah.
I have tried 3 different ways to make generative fill work in a file. One was just for funsies to make, like we were just talking about, a wallpaper extension of an existing Drive splash page. All I needed it to do was just continue a forest in the background.
Continue that background.
Yeah. 4 inches on either side. That's all I wanted Photoshop to do. I tried 30 different generations with multiple different text descriptions of what I wanted to do. It was, for the most part, nonsense. And then so I was like, okay, well, maybe it's not good at that. I'll try a different thing. I had a comic this week where I needed to draw a children's activity book maze. It is literally black lines on white. Every Denny's menu has ever had this. It is a simple thing to generate. I said in very descriptive and sometimes in less descriptive ways, because I tried a bunch, 30 different generations. Nonsense, Brad. At one point, it created a 3D maze with a freaking minotaur in it. I said, what? How did I get to this?
You got a labyrinth.
This is not what I want. And so I have tried in good faith to use AI in simple steps in my process and have found it useless so far. And I know that there are people out there going, oh, well, Dave, you just got to learn how to use the prompts. To which I respond, it was faster to me to draw the maze. It was faster to me to draw the forest than it is to figure out this and what magic words make the AI do what I want it to do. I'm just going to draw it at this point, you know?
Sometimes, no kidding. And remember that great line from Seinfeld where he pointed out that if George put all the work he put into not working, he puts more work into trying to not work. It was basically the comeuppance.
Right.
And do you remember those Palm Pilots? Before smartphones became a thing, you got a Palm Pilot. And it said that you'd just write a note into the Palm Pilot and it would turn it into type.
Into pure gibberish,
note. It sounds great, right? Sounds just like AI. You put a sentence in and it completes your background. Fantastic. I got a Palm Pilot. I wrote into it. Turns out you have to draw those letters exactly the way it expects it to be drawn. Your P has to look exactly the way they draw P. If not, it might come out a B. So you had to learn to draw their font in order to get it. Well, you know what? In all the time I'm sitting there trying to learn how to draw their font, I could just be typing, or better yet, I could buy myself a pad of Post-it notes and just write a fucking note. You know? But we put so much work into trying to make things easier for ourselves. We forget sometimes it's easier just to pick up a pen and start drawing.
Yeah, and so I'm saying this not as a Luddite. I was actively trying to use AI to make it do what I wanted to do. I think we're just not there yet in terms of it understanding an average prompt and producing an average drawing of what someone's looking for. Like I cannot emphasize enough. It was just producing a hot mess. And I'm so glad to see you compare it to the early version of the AI the Palm Pilot. Because I also owned a Palm Pilot, and you had to not only learn this very specific English language script for letters. Do you remember this? You also had to learn kind of stenographer's notes for how to do a comma, how to do, and I'm like, I am not a courtroom stenographer. Like, I should not have to learn this second language of writing just to make a note like buy groceries. It's like, what the hell? So what I'm getting at here is, yes, I'm sure there are artists that have figured out AI and they're learning all the prompts. It's like, they're probably in their 20s. They probably have more time. Frankly, I'd rather be drawing right now than using AI. It's still faster for me to draw the damn thing, even a complicated thing, than have AI try to figure out what magic words it needs, you know?
Yeah. So, I mean, is that where you're going to land on AI at this point, Dave? We're just not there yet?
Just not. I mean, I want it to be there. I want to be there, but I'm not there yet with AI.
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, I have to disagree with you. I think we are there. If you're talking about the end of the Comic Lab podcast, because this is what you've been listening to, the show about making comics and making a living from comics.
I love this is what you've been listening to. Like you've just served them a plate of hot buffalo turd. Like, look, this is what you get. Don't ask me. You ordered it. Your hosts have been my ever delightful friend, Brad Geiger, the editor of webcomics.com and the cartoonist of Evil Inc. at evilcomic.com. I'm using that this week. Feels nice.
Thank you very much. And my close personal friend, Dave Kellett, the co-director of the comics documentary Stripped and the cartoonist of Sheldon at sheldoncomics.com and Drive at drivecomic.com.
And don't forget to look for the hand-drawn maze on sheldoncomics.com, which AI was not able to produce. There's some supercomputer in Northern California that was not able to produce the damn maze that I asked for. And I will say the Comic Lab theme song is used with permission from Andy Creighton at theworldrecord.net. And this episode was edited by the ever wonderful Matt Woodard of Woodsong Productions over at www.woodsong.media.
If you love Comic Lab, you can rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts, and you may hear your review featured on a future episode. Also, if you're listening on Spotify, take a second, give us a 5-star review. It absolutely helps get this show out to more people who need to hear it.
And Comic Lab is made possible by your support on patreon.com/Comic Lab. So we'll go ahead and say that twice. Patreon.com/can't even draw a maze. It, honest to God, produced a 3D maze with a Minotaur. Can you believe that?
Oh, that's so funny.
What a piece of shit. I asked it for black line on white background, simple child's activity maze. It produces a 3D gradient pattern maze or labyrinth with a Minotaur. By the way, the Minotaur looked punch drunk. He's like, ah. Yeah. And I was like, what is this? This is not what I asked for.
I put extend background in once, and it just had a gradient fill and the word background. In words, in letters.
No, it
background.
Didn't.
I swear to Jesus. It just said background. I'm not funny enough to make that up.